Hello, everybody. In spirit of the national championship game that's today between Indiana and Miami, I am having a previous guest on here, and we are talking about tribalism. More specifically, we're talking about sports rivalries and how things can just get taken too seriously. Hope that you enjoy this episode, and thank you for tuning in. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Emotions, where we explore research, ideas, and practice for emotional wellness. This is a special episode. I'll be having a guest back on here with me from earlier. I believe it's episode 27, Tribalism, and Connecting with Others was the aim of that episode. And we are both really big sports fans. And so we were just laughing about the idea via email and how exploring that in a practical sense probably has a lot of really funny stories. So, Dr. Cottone, how you doing today?
Hey, good to see you. Good to be back. I'm really happy to be back. It was a great conversation last time we chatted up, and good to be back chatting up maybe more about sports this time around.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess just let's jump into it. This is a more casual conversation.
hmm
You have some ties to the University of Indiana,
hmm
which if we think about sports and college football particularly, you guys are having a pretty good year.
Yeah, it's an unprecedented thing that I mean, they had a really good season last year. I think we spoke last year at the end of the college football playoff, and Indiana, which had, I think, finished the season ranked seventh, ended up playing Notre Dame in the first round of the college football playoffs, and Notre Dame beat them. They got eliminated. Notre Dame ended up going all the way to the national championship against Ohio State and lost to Ohio State. So that
Mhm.
was all early. That was 2024-2025 season. But now it's the 2025-2026 season, and Indiana, for the first time ever, is ranked number one after beating Ohio State last week in the Big Ten championship game. And so my son, who goes to Indiana, my son Julian goes to Indiana, and his um, one of his early roommates, Lincoln Murph, is on the team.
Mhm.
And they're having this dream season. Never has been done before in Indiana history that they were ranked number one. They've never won the Big Ten conference championship game, and this is all unprecedented territory. And but your Georgia Bulldogs, actually, I think your Georgia Bulldogs are the one team in the college football playoffs that I would be worried about from an Indiana perspective. So
Yeah, they seem to be finding their way at the right time. I'll say that because if people were watching them all season, they probably would not have thought the same thing about that probably about 6 or 7 weeks ago. And it seems like somewhere or another, I think it was that Texas game. It really kind of feels like they just found a pass rush and good night. They are a terrifying team on paper when you look at them now. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
They handled. I saw the SEC championship game against Alabama, and they looked pretty dominant in that game. So
Yeah.
nobody is going to want to play Georgia, including IU. But if it's in the national championship, would they meet before the national? I haven't seen the
They would
brackets
they would meet there. They would meet there.
in the national championship.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So that'll be exciting if that happens. We'll have to have some really ridiculous wager, like,
Mhm.
somebody has to like sign a book or, I don't know, do the chicken dance on a roof or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll find
Sure,
we'll
we
find
can come up
something
with something
creative.
funny. But like I'm just thinking, sticking to your topic of like tribalism, I'm thinking about all of these really, really funny stories and also some really great stories that I've had in my lifetime being a fan of sports. And when I first start thinking about this, and even I did a workshop last year with some middle school kids. I was presenting on the science of hate, and we were talking about sports teams. And there was one kid that was just like, "I'm from Boston, and I hate every team from New York." And I was like, "Well, really? Like, why?" And it was funny. Like all of the reasons he had were like really ridiculous reasons to,
Yeah.
non a non-biased person. But to him, he was just like, no, but that absolutely is the reason why they are terrible. I can't stand them. And I'm curious if you have any funny stories, either, your connection to IU or like anything else.
Mhm. Well, it's funny because, IU is just a more recently adopted team since 2023 when my
Hmm.
son started going there.
Hmm.
Previous to that, my family, for reasons that are not completely clear, we were Michigan football fans. And now this week, Michigan has had their own debacle with Sharon Moore and that whole situation. So they're going to be looking for a coach. But college in New York, there really isn't a college football team to root for. So we end up having to adopt out-of-state teams, either if we have a personal connection because somebody went there or
Hmm.
for some re other reason. I don't know. My father may have won a bet on Michigan decades ago, and that's maybe why he started rooting for Michigan, and that's why we've rooted for Michigan all of these years. I don't know. It's never been completely clear, but when you start rooting for a team, it doesn't matter why you started rooting for the team in the first place. You just adopt the mantle of the tribe's um, grievances and the things that they take pride in. And so over the years, I'd found myself taking on these things for Michigan, even though I didn't go to Michigan. No one in our family went to Michigan, and you just you start adopting all of the propaganda and things like that, so it doesn't even matter why you started rooting for a team. So that's one of my funny stories. But in New York, the sport that probably brings out the most tribalistic rivalries is baseball, and you have the Mets and the Yankees, and sometimes you have the Mets, you have the Yankees and the Red Sox. And this is a rivalry that even predates when the Mets were a team, because before the Mets were a team, you had the Dodgers and the Giants as the National League teams in New York. And it was a matter of really who owned the city. Uh, baseball was the most important sport by far back then in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and you had these three teams and the rivalries. And so it's interesting. My wife, I may have talked a little bit in the last episode about my wife being from a Jewish background, and I
Hmm.
was from a Catholic background. And when we got together, the interesting thing was nobody really cared. It was never a big deal about what our religious backgrounds were, but what was a big deal was that my wife came from a Yankees family and I came from a Mets family, and that was like a big deal. And my wife grew up with season tickets to the Yankees, and we were always Mets fans, and so that took some finessing to get through and to get around, but that's how things go in New York.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. You got me like taking me back to like some of the like funny and like some of the serious stories, and like you taking me to like a couple of rivalries down south, which is just like Georgia Bama. It's a big one.
Yeah.
Because they, for some reason, every year over the course of like, I don't know, 15, 20 years, end up meeting each other for like championships. You know,
Mhm.
they've probably met for championship games 7, 8, 9 times in the last, decade or two.
Yeah.
And so there's just so much gravity to it. And it's like almost like one was like the big brother and one was like the little sibling.
Well, that's
And
exactly.
yeah, so it was just like this, like just like almost kind of like pure like resentment on one side, and then kind of just like pride and leave me alone on the other side. And like you just like find reasons to be like why you didn't like the other team and why you thought you hated them and stuff like that. And the funny part is that a lot of times there's like family connections. So I've
Yeah.
got family in Alabama, and every time they come in town or every time we go to Alabama, this comes up as a conversation, and it's just
Uh,
talking about ships, and it's talking about all these other pieces, and then you're just yelling at each other. And here we are, blood relatives, and we're
uh,
just yelling about this one thing because of colors on a jersey. So it's always really funny when I think about that.
Well, you highlighted something I was going to talk about, and I think you're absolutely right. A lot of these rivalries do take the form of kind of big brother against little brother, that type of a thing.
Hmm.
And it's the Mets Yankees rivalry takes that form. In some cases, like if we're talking about baseball, like the Cardinals Cubs rivalry takes that form. Um, uh, Lots of rivalries, whether it's college, pros, they they seem to take that form. And you have all of these family dynamics that end up playing out, even if you don't have family members on the other side or in the other tribe, your own personal feelings about if you are, in your own particular family, the younger brother who feels like you get the short straw, in lots of different situations, and you happen to be a fan of the team that is the little brother in that rivalry relationship, then you're going to over-identify with that team, and everything that happens in that relationship is almost going to be like a microcosm of your family relationship.
Hmm.
And so, but we can also look at it on a cultural level too, because there are lots of different cultural and even socioeconomic factors that play into this as well. So, in New York, the Yankees for forever were always known as the team that, had all of the money. They always had the highest payroll. They could always spend the most money on players. And,
Certainly how I remember it as a kid.
yeah, that's certainly, yeah. Things haven't changed much, although in the last couple of years, the Dodgers and, believe it or not, the Mets have kind of surpassed them. But for many, many years, the Mets were always, the team that couldn't spend, the same amount of money on players as the Yankees would. So the Mets fans would have the feeling of being almost like in a lower socioeconomic group than the Yankees. And then you start to attribute all of these socioeconomic, socio-political
Mm.
things to the rivalry that, may not necessarily be there inherently, but kind of play out on a cultural level, and you can kind of pick up with these things and run with them. So
Hmm.
um, it's uh, it's our ability and willingness to identify or even over-identify that I think makes fandom so fun, but it also makes us so susceptible to the tribalism and the propaganda that goes along with it.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I was thinking of an experience that like I had when I was in, goodness gracious, I was in Louisville, Kentucky.
Hmm.
And it wasn't particular big rivalry, but we're talking about tribalism. I remember me and my buddy were going to this game, um and we're Wake Forest fans because that's where we went to school.
Hmm.
And we buy tickets, just kind of randomly nosebleed tickets, and sit all the way up at the top. And we're just like, you know what? We see two seats. Let's go. So this was back in the day when you could do that. So we
Uh-huh.
went and we found some seats at the 50-yard line. We just sat there and like, nobody came. It's like, these are our seats. So we just sat down, made ourselves at home on the home side. So here it is, like
Oh.
a team full of like a sea full of like Louisville fans.
Uh-huh.
And here's just us, this like, lowly little independent school, doesn't have a super strong football program. And we're up. We're like 6-0, 9-0, kick a couple field goals. We're up and we're like talking smack to everybody, like, can't stop us, blah, 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 blah. And like people are booing us, like
Uh-huh.
cursing us out and stuff like that. And we're holding our own. And then there was a little known player at the time. He was well known in college, but
Mhm.
Lamar Jackson decided to go off in that game and single-handedly won that game for Louisville. I want to say like 24-9,
Mhm.
because he decided to take the game into his own hands, and we were both like, oh, he's gonna be special. And
Mhm.
on the way out, like people were just like, ha ha ha, bye 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 bye. So we were just like, yeah, we'll see you guys next year, blah blah. Talking smack, and then this one guy was like, hey, you guys like held your own in there. We respect that because everyone else was talking smack to us. Like I was afraid that somebody was gonna push us down the stairs if we would have won that game. But there
Yeah,
was, like
yeah.
one guy was just like, man, you guys are funny. You guys held your own, and we went out and we like had pizza and they treated us to some barbecue and we hang out with them for the rest of the evening. And I just remember how cool that was that we had that opportunity to be able to like actually connect with each other when it started off just being like, you evil, I'm good,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So you guys were able to step out of the tribal mentality.
Well, it wasn't necessarily us. I want to say it was the other guy from the other
Well,
team.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
everybody involved in that, right?
yeah,
Were
yeah,
able
yeah.
to step out of the tribal mentality. And I wondered if, eh, the nuances of these situations are very important, right? So, like you said, if you guys would have won the game, then it may have been a different story,
Oh
right?
yeah, somebody probably would have thrown a bottle at us. I'm
Right.
pretty sure.
But also, maybe if it was closer to a 50-50 fan dynamic, right? Then it might have been, more competitive. But because you were only two, Wake Forest fans, you were much less threatening than if there
Mhm,
was like, 200 of you in that, section or something like that.
mhm.
But the fact that people were able to step out of that tribalistic mindset, kind of is a nice thing to hear, and it's a nice thing to see. And I think it becomes harder and harder to do that. But like you said, I think had the home team had lost there, it might not have ended the same way, right? So
Oh
the
yeah, probably not.
tails
Because
are.
that emotional charge probably would have been far greater, I'd imagine.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And this brings up so many different sociological and sociopolitical elements and discussions. The famous Jane Elliott study with the brown eyes, blue
Hmm.
eyes with the kids after the Martin Luther King assassination, right? And these are kids, and they, are forming tribalistic alliances based on just the color of their eyes,
Right.
right? Nothing more significant or more important than that. But in the Dr. Seuss book, The Sneetches, is whether people the creatures had stars on their bellies or not, and you could form these tribalistic alliances over anything. But once it starts, it doesn't matter. Then you kind of you buy into it lock, stock, and barrel, and I think then it comes down to a person's individual psychology, the extent to which they're going to stay in it or they're going to be
Hmm.
able to, step out of it at any one particular time. But, are there ever times that you feel that you struggle to step out of that?
You know, that's a good question. Um, Maybe I'm gonna say that it might be helpful because I've traveled and live in a lot of different places. And so
Mhm,
I've like rubbed shoulders with people that are fans of like all different teams. And I've like had a lot of friends that were like fans like kind of close to other teams. And I remember like one of my best friends in college, he's a huge LSU fan.
mhm,
And Georgia LSU wasn't particularly a rivalry, but like, during those games when they played those couple of years, like, man, it was heated.
mhm.
And you're sitting there thinking, like, man, like I get into it with somebody, but I already had a connection with a friend that was on the other side of the aisle. And so I
Mhm.
think I kind of lived in a place where like I usually always had somebody like that that was
Yeah.
like in that it was in my world that was like on the other side of the aisle in terms of a fan. So I want to say maybe that kind of helped me a little bit.
Mhm.
Because, even though I grew up in Atlanta, I was a huge Braves fan. Like, the Yankees were always trying to whoop up on us. And I knew one dude from New York and he would give me a hard time and we would argue and yell about it, but like we were friends. So I think little things like that, it always kind of helped. Now that you had just asked that question, I was like, oh yeah, having folks that are on the other side of the spectrum, like actually really
Yeah.
helps a lot. Or the other
Yeah.
camp, maybe that's the better way to describe it.
Well, it's interesting because you used words that unwittingly are, typically associated with politics, other side of the aisle, other side of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Typically associated with politics. And it's interesting, like if you go to another country and you don't really know what the politics are, but you talk to people who are on different sides of the political spectrum, they'll be talking about things with the same passion that Americans will talk about their politics, but it doesn't hit you the same way. You're just kind of like, can't we all just get along, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It feels like you feel so detached from it. And
Hmm.
meanwhile, the ironic thing is that in other countries, they're dealing with basically the same issues that we're dealing with, and their passions around these things are stoked by many of the same things, whether it's immigration or taxes or, racial issues or whatever it may be. But when you go to another country, and you hear people talking about their local politics, many cases it just, you don't know the players, you don't really know the history and the tribal propaganda. So you're just kind of like, what's the big deal? Can't you all just get along?
Hmm.
Right? But then when you're here in your own country and you're like, no, of course we can't just get along. Can't you believe they did X, Y, and Z? Can't you believe blah, 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 blah.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because like there is still a part of me that I remember being like, I still hate the Yankees though.
That's great.
It's those 90s years, man. Like
Oh
we
yeah.
should have had 3, 4 titles, and man, they were just it was a stacked deck, man. Mariano Rivera is one of the greatest closers of all time, as much as I hate to admit it. Um, you
It's
know,
so easy to hate the Yankees. I mean,
yeah.
it
I
really
like
is.
that I like that now we're doing that now. Both of us are just like, yeah, you can hate them. You can hate
Yeah. That's right.
them.
That's right.
Are
I
there
think
any are there any other really good rivalries that like you remember like being connected to loosely?
Well, you may have remembered from our last conversation, the sport that I probably follow closest, even though I follow baseball very closely, the sport I probably follow most closely now is hockey, and I'm a big Rangers fan in hockey, and their hometown rival is the Islanders, and it's the Rangers went through a period where some of the worst years that they had. The Islanders won 4 straight championships. And so that was the era that I was growing up in elementary school and middle school.
Yeah.
And, you deal with the razzing and the ragging from your friends. And that's really the worst part of it. Watching the game, I never hated like the Islander players. I mean, these were like great, great players. But I always say, I don't hate the players, I hate the fans. And so you just remember your friends in school and what they're going to say, the next day. And, there were days like, I wouldn't want to go to school, and the Islanders eliminated the Rangers from the playoffs one year. And, I was just like, I didn't want to go to school. Like, I'm going to deal with this, razzing from my friends.
Hmm.
So, and I still kind of have this mentality. I'm a psychologist now, and, one of my patients is a season ticket holder for the Islanders. And this year happens to be a year where the Islanders are having a better season than the Rangers, so he's been kind of giving it to me and and stuff. So, these little things still stick with you and it's like it's a thorn in your side. So even
Yeah.
though here I am, I'm, 50 years old, I'm a professional psychologist, and yet I could still get drawn back into it, just like a
Hmm.
just like a elementary school kid.
Yeah, that's true. Those emotions are strong, man. They really are. They really are.
But when you win in a situation like that, it feels like there's nothing better in the world.
Yeah. And and maybe this is I don't know if this is me, but I had this thought one time. Maybe it is me because I'm an Atlanta fan, man. We've had some good years, but we like lived in pain and upset and
Oh
suffering.
yeah, yeah.
So, it's like there's a part of just like having losses help you kind of have a sobering moment.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think and I think having those moments helps you kind of see like, it is just a game. Because otherwise, I'm probably gonna have a heart attack because it is way too hard to be a fan of all of this stuff and then
Yeah.
take it so seriously
Yeah.
because it's suffering. Any fan, you have your good years and then you have your bad years,
Yeah.
you know.
It's funny. So I get you now, if I remember correctly, you grew up in the Georgia, Atlanta, greater Atlanta area?
Yeah, right outside Atlanta. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And so it's funny because the Falcons were playing last night. They played the Bucks, and I was watching. It was funny. I can't believe I never like realized this, but the Falcons have the same exact color scheme on their uniform as the Georgia Bulldogs. It's black and red and white.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I never realized that, and that that's not a coincidence. And let's see. I mean, Atlanta, at least you have the Braves, they'll win a World Series every, 10, 15 years, it seems. And even when they're not winning World Series, they always have, one of the best records in the league. The Falcons, haven't really won much. The Hawks, they,
We had our glory day in the 90s with Mookie and Dominique.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Did they make a conference final?
No.
No.
No. Because you know who else was playing in the 90s?
Yeah,
Yeah,
number
some little
23.
dude with the initials M and J.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Was never gonna happen.
And then briefly, Atlanta had a hockey team, the Atlanta Thrashers, but they moved to, I can't remember, they may have
They're
moved
the Jets now.
there. Oh, okay, so they moved to Winnipeg because
Uh,
Winnipeg originally had a hockey team that moved um to Arizona, I think. And so right, so Atlanta Thrashers moved to Winnipeg. Okay. So yeah, so it's been, I guess outside of the Braves and the Georgia Bulldogs, it's been
tough sledding.
it's been
Tough
tough.
sledding. Yeah. 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 But I mean, I think what I think in my experience in my super big, sports fandom world is that I've actually met a lot of really cool people. Sometimes, you don't keep in touch. Other times you're like, hey man, you're a cool person. Like,
Mhm.
next time I'm around, I'll hit you up. I've met some really cool people going to games. And I think that's for me has been like one of the best parts is it starts off in jest and you're talking a lot of smack and you're
Mhm.
going back and forth and that's fun and then you start talking with people like hey man who are you where you from that kind of piece um because that's the good part too is like being able
Yeah.
to make connections with other folks. I'm thinking of like the Georgia Florida game which is a big rivalry and every year I go there I always come back telling people, man, I made some really good friends with people from Florida. And
Mhm.
who would have thought going to a Georgia Florida game, you make a bunch of friends from people from Florida. But like if my mindset was the other way, which is like they're all trash, I would have never done that.
Yeah, it's really it's so interesting how these these allegiances can also bring out the best in you. And it reminds me, so I have a good friend. Our sons played hockey together. My friend Gary, our sons played hockey together. And when we first got to know each other, they started playing hockey together in 2016. And of course, the election of 2016 was, a very
Hmm.
intense election. And, he was very far on one side and I was very far on the other side. And, initially I was not a huge fan of his. And then I learned that he was a huge Ranger fan. And so I was like, this is tough. He's on the other
What do I
side
do?
politics, but we're both really big Rangers. So we started having some conversations about the Rangers, and I'm like, he's not as big a jerk as I thought he was. And, we'd have
Hmm.
more conversations, and I'm like, all right, he's okay. And then, we started going to games together, and, it just, eventually became kind of an ongoing joke that, we have, this strong disagreement with politics, but when it comes to hockey, we're able to like have a great time together, go to games, and we usually texting after most games about what went right, what went wrong, and things like that. And so it can help you to find common ground with people that you might not otherwise find common ground with.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really true point. I've been looking for this study for, I want to say 3 or 4 years. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about a study where they had people that were fans of the same team. If I
Mhm.
can remember, I think it was the Dallas Cowboys. And same thing, there were two camps of people and two political divides.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and they brought them in to kind of talk about issues in their lives and stuff like that. And I forget what the conditions and stuff like that were, but by having that commonality with having a sports team that they both agreed on, some of the other differences kind of started to melt away exactly just like you said. And I wish I could find this study. I'm still looking
Mm.
for it, but I think it just highlights that I don't know, it's almost like there's kind of like some little mechanism in us that
Yeah.
kind of says like, oh crap, I see something in you now. Now I can't say you're evil
Right.
because you like a thing I like.
Yeah, yeah.
Now I'm evil. You know what I mean? Like there's
Right,
some
right.
there's some weird mechanism that kind of does that in us. And I think about like, like that can do some really powerful things if you think about, the world and you think about politics and you think about just treating other people with humanity. That can be a powerful thing.
Well, it's forced me to kind of soften my positions on different things. And if he would be on, he's very honest, and he would probably say the same thing. It's forced him to kind of soften his positions on certain things. And
Mhm.
because we have this friendship around the Rangers, around hockey, um, he, will actually take the time to listen a few seconds longer to the other person's argument, whereas, with other people, we just like turn it off, turn them out,
Mhm.
whatever. And in those brief few seconds that you let the other person in, you're like, yeah, I guess the other person's not an idiot. I guess they're not crazy. I still might see it a different way, but, they're not an idiot and they're not crazy. And now, shut up and let's talk about the Rangers again. So,
Exactly. Exactly. You're like, enough of that. Enough of that.
enough of that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think it's fun thinking about like how, like our last conversation was, very much talking about what some of the research says, but man, as a lived experience, and I almost want to say like you encounter stuff like this every day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially, I have a lot of patients, right, who might be on the other side and politically. Although, I would say probably my perspective has probably moderated a lot over the last few years anyway, but when you have patients who are coming to you and they trust you to be a guide for them in many different ways, they're sharing very deeply personal things about themselves. And you know um in many cases, I get asked very direct questions about how I feel about things.
Mm.
And it's hard to avoid, you're always told you should avoid conversations about politics and religion. But sometimes people ask you a very direct question, and it becomes a challenge to try to present things in a way that is both honest, but also doesn't alienate the other person who's really there to be helped and treated by you. And so, you know, I I think for me, the thing that I've really centered my life around in recent years, and it's not just limited to politics, it's limited to everything in life, is the pursuit of truth. And I think from my perspective, if you go through life and you prioritize truth more than anything else, then you will leave no stone unturned, and you will try as hard as possible to resist propaganda wherever it may be. Because each tribe has its own propaganda, but propaganda can only survive in a world that's closed, where a person can't step outside and do their own investigating. Because very often, when you do your own investigating, you find out, well, this was taken out of context. This wasn't true at all, and this was only partially true. And you try to start to piece together a larger picture in the service of truth. And when you have truth as your guiding light, then the to me the most common consequence of that is that you have to moderate your opinions, because you learn that things, when you really prioritize truth, are different to varying degrees than your tribe may have had you believe.
Yeah, you see that the one perspective that you hold, which comes from your experience, right? You didn't always have a choice over that. That one perspective is not the only truth out there. Mm.
Yeah, so I can't remember if we talked about this last time, but I usually have a Rubik's Cube with me. And, this is to highlight that we could be looking at the same exact thing and seeing two different colors, seeing two different realities, because a
Mhm.
cube, has six sides, and this Rubik's cube has six sides, and it has six different colors.
Mhm.
So right now it's facing you, and the color that you're seeing is yellow,
Mhm.
and the side that's facing me is white. And so
Mhm.
if I asked you what color this thing was, you would say yellow. And if somebody asked me what color this was, I would say white. And neither one of us would be lying, and neither one of us would be wrong. But you're seeing yellow because you're seeing this on a two-dimensional screen, and I'm seeing white because the way it's angled towards me, I'm only seeing two dimensions of the cube. I'm not seeing the third dimension. But when I turn it this way, now you can see three colors. You can see green, you can see yellow, and you can see orange and I can see red, white, and blue. And so we put all of those six colors together, and those are the six sides of this three-dimensional object. But
Mm,
so often in life, we have three-dimensional problems that get reduced down to two dimensions, and
mhm.
you can't see it in its full entirety and in its full complexity.
Yeah, 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 yeah. What's that idea? It's like flattening, right? When
Yes.
you flatten a person in practice to like one idea, like, oh, you a Yankees fan, get out of my face. You know, we do the same thing for issues and problems in our lives too. Yeah,
Right, flattening, right? It's
yeah,
all a reductionism. I'm going to reduce you to this, even though
yeah,
you're
yeah.
much more complicated, nuanced. I'm going to reduce you to this.
Mm, mm. That's cool. Man, I like that we even got to a new idea from this conversation, which was just about sports. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Maybe I'll wrap us up in just thinking about our conversation on good rivalries. What do
Mhm.
you think are some really great rivalries in sports? Maybe just like pick two or three sports and just say like a great rivalry that you can think of.
So I guess the two that come to mind the most, because they're probably the two most even rivalries, is, I grew up rooting for Michigan football, so I would say Michigan, Ohio State in college football.
That's a good one.
And that's a very even rivalry through the years and through the decades. And I like even rivalries, that don't necessarily have the big brother, little brother dynamic. It's about, well, who made the most of what they had this particular year. And sometimes it's Michigan and sometimes it's Ohio State. And then, maybe the best rivalry in history in that regard, in terms of it being an even rivalry, is the Celtics and the Lakers. And they
Ooh,
went back and
yeah.
forth, especially in the 80s with championships. And, they're the two winningest franchises in basketball. So I would say those two stand out the most to me.
Those are good ones. That,
What about for
yeah.
you?
Oh man. Hmm. I'm gonna go college football first. And this is a really fun rivalry. A lot of people aren't gonna think that I was gonna go here first because
Mhm.
it's Alabama, but it's Alabama Auburn. It is
Ah,
such
yeah,
a good rivalry, and it's because I don't care how good or how bad either of those teams are, most of those games have ended in chaos. And
yeah.
so they are so much fun to watch. Um, just in the sense that like those two teams, just for some reason, it doesn't matter. It's gonna come down to the wire. So that's probably one of mine. Um, if I go basketball, I think this is gonna show like my generation
Mhm.
that one of my favorite basketball rivalries, it's not a big one now, but it was the Cavs and the Warriors. There were
Oh,
maybe
okay.
there were
We're going
maybe
back
like
about 7, 8 years ago,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. There were probably about I don't want to say like 4 or 5 years where like those
Yeah,
teams were just they were just electric finals and they were
yeah,
just fun to watch, entertaining and it swung back and forth too,
yeah.
sometimes within the series.
Who did you
So
root for in those series?
that's a good question. I probably want to say I was with the Warriors.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Steph Curry's from North Carolina. We had like the smoothest three-point shot ever of all
Uh-huh.
time. And like, you rooted for the underdog. I guess that's who I'm picking myself to, like,
Mhm.
the underdog. So it was kind of fun to
Yeah.
watch those games.
Well, it's funny, I was rooting for Cleveland in those series, and I was a LeBron fan primarily because, growing up as a big Knicks fan in New York and those 90s rivalries between the Knicks and the Bulls,
Bulls,
right? And
yeah.
you know, the Knicks only beat the Bulls once in the playoffs, and that was the year that Michael Jordan played baseball instead of basketball.
Hmm.
And so, but the Bulls, ruined the Knicks championship hopes for the whole decade of the 90s. So, I always grew up like competitively like hating Michael Jordan. I mean, I respect the hell out of Michael Jordan. He's, obviously the greatest ever. It hurts me to say that, but he was. But I always, I think I started rooting for LeBron to, beat out Michael Jordan, as the greatest ever, because of my
Oh,
competitive,
yeah,
hatred
yeah,
for
yeah, yeah,
Michael
yeah.
Jordan. So I always wanted to see, LeBron do well, and even now, there's a small chance that he could surpass Jordan in titles, but it probably won't happen. Jordan has six, and I think LeBron does he have four or five now?
Can't
He
recall.
had two with the Heat, one with Cleveland, one with the Lakers. So he has four. So he still has a couple of titles to go to tie Jordan, but
Yeah.
probably won't happen.
Yeah. Still impressive nonetheless, man. Like, wow.
Yeah.
It's just, you think of like the level of like, you know, I've had my time as being an athlete in high school, but
Mhm.
goodness gracious, to do something that elite for that long, that's got to be tough, especially with your
Yeah.
body, because your body doesn't hold up.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know that turning 50 now.
It
So
doesn't. Well, John, I gotta say thanks again for making the space for this conversation. I gotta do more of these. These are fun too, where it's like, we don't need to talk about all the ideas and the research and stuff like that. Let's just talk about life. And then it brings
yeah.
up all this stuff anyway. So, I hope I can have more of these. And if Georgia and Indiana happen, we have to have a conversation about it.
I'll tell you what, maybe we could do it on location at the national championship and, write it off as a tax deduction.
That's a thought. That is a thought. Where is it at?
That's a good question. I'll have to ask Siri. Hey Siri, where is the college football national championship game?
The CFP Championship will be played on the 19th of January 2026 at 7:30 p.m. at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens,
Miami.
Florida.
Miami. Okay.
Nice. That's not a bad location. That's not a bad location. Well, let's stay tuned to that and see if it happens. We'll have to see if we can make it happen.
That sounds great.
Well, that did not happen. The national championship will be played later tonight between Indiana and Miami. So, good luck, Dr. Cottone. I hope that your son and your family and your household get a chance to root for a championship tonight. And as always, a special shout out to Palm Trees out of South Africa. And today's outro beat is G Mills from Brooklyn. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Please enjoy the game, watch tonight, and make a friend. Who knows, you might find somebody that likes another sport or another team from you.